Hello, my name's David Clarke. I'm the Managing Director of DVC, and I'm going to take you on a short guide through the new features of Premiere Pro CC. So let's just start the program up. Probably the biggest change with Premiere Pro CC is how you actually pay Adobe for the software. They've gone over to a subscription model where you pay them so much per month to have the software rather than pay them an amount of money outright. Now, we're not going to go over the pros and cons of that here. We're going to concentrate on the program itself, why you'd actually want to use Premiere Pro CC and what are the new features they've got inside of it. After starting Premiere Pro, this is the first thing you'll see, which is a kind of regular welcome screen. It's changed slightly, but pretty much the same as before. You can open up an existing project or you can start a new one. You'll notice here there's a little tick box to show the welcome screen. If you untick that, then it goes straight into Premiere and doesn't show you the welcome screen. One of the small little changes you've got. Looking at the program itself, there's no sort of huge revolutionary feature that's going to make you want to run out and get the program, but there's a lot of small changes which add up to a much better workflow and a much nicer way of working. So things like this don't show the welcome screen, several others which I'll show you as we go through. You'll also notice here there's this sync settings stuff at the top here. You can do this actually when you're inside the program, or you can do that from the start screen. With Premiere Pro CC, you no longer have a serial number for the program. The program is actually activated by your Adobe ID. It's got a few advantages. First of all, you can actually save your basic Premiere settings in your Adobe ID. So you can set up your own preferences, how you like the windows laid out, various things like that, and then if you just click this button, it'll sync those settings to the web, and then when you go onto another computer with your Premiere on it, then you can click the button again and the new system will have Premiere set up how you like it. You can even go to a system which isn't yours and sync it up to your account. So imagine my name was Chris at DVC, I could click on here and then sync up my Premiere to Chris's settings. So just a nice way of being able to cart your settings around with you. Now, so you can do that from here, or you can do that when you're inside the program. And of course, you don't have to do it. You don't have to use any of the cloud-based stuff that they've got in the Creative Cloud if you don't want to. But some of it, like this, is quite nice. Anyway, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start up a new project. And we get your new project dialog box. Pretty much the same as in previous versions of Premiere. They've moved things around a bit, so the Mercury playback settings now at the top, but it's pretty much the same. The biggest difference you get with CC is on the scratch discs. They've added in a new one. Project autosave. Now normally when Premiere autosaves projects, the copies go next to the project. If what happens is that particular hard drive dies, you're going to lose your backups and the originals. Now you have the option to put the autosaves somewhere else. So in this case I'll just go into my computer and make up a folder, and now whenever it autosaves it puts it onto a different drive. So if the worst thing that can happen happens, your hard drive dies, at least you've got a backup of the project somewhere else. It's not a backup of all the media, just the project. But the project is your edit. It's everything you spent all the time doing to refine the edit. Okay, I'm going to click on OK, and I'm going to get into Premiere. And here we are into the main interface of Premiere Pro CC. If you've been using CS6, you'll say that looks pretty familiar. What you might have noticed is it didn't prompt you to make up a sequence. I've got a big empty timeline window, but I've got no tracks in it because I've not made any sequences. Again, small change with Premiere Pro CC is that whenever you start a new project, you don't have any sequences. The idea is you're going to bring some footage in, and then you'll probably make a footage out of the sequence rather than make a sequence first. On the subject of opening up projects, let's have a quick look at the preferences, where you can see a new one. At the top here, at startup, show the welcome screen, or open the most recent project. If you've got it set to that, then when you next go back into Premiere, it'll go straight away and open your most recent project, as opposed to showing you the welcome screen. Now I'm going to start this project by bringing in some footage, so I'm going to go to the media browser, which is the best way of bringing in card-based footage, and I'm going to go to some AVCHD footage, which I have copied onto the computer. And here you can see the media browser that was introduced in CS6, where you get a little thumbnail of all the clips that you've got in the folder, and you can drag your mouse over them, and you can see a picture. So as I'm dragging the mouse there, you can see I'm scrubbing through the picture, and then I can just select a whole bunch of clips and import them. Or if I want to bring in a whole folder of clips, just find whatever folder it is that you want to bring in, and then right click on that and say import, and it brings in that whole folder of footage. It then pops up with a message saying, some of that stuff isn't things I can load. Yeah, fair enough. But having imported a folder that way, you can see the footage ends up in the folder, which is nice. Premiere is now conforming some of my footage. Well, my footage here is AVCHD, so it needs to be conformed. That's where it changes the sound into something more usable. Does that exactly the same as it did in previous versions. And then I can pop the project into icon mode, and I can hover scrub across these clips as well. Now all this stuff is exactly the same as it was in Premiere Pro 6, obviously better than it was in Premiere Pro 5 and before. Where you'll notice some changes is on the timeline. So I want to make up a timeline with some of these clips. Now I could go to File, and then New, and then Sequence, and then you choose from any of the settings that are available there. But in fact, Adobe are thinking you're actually going to load up some clips, right click on one of them, say, make up a new sequence from this clip. And what it'll do is make up a new sequence which matches that clip. That was a feature in CS6. They're kind of expecting you to make more of it in Premiere CC. Now having got a timeline, this is where you're going to start to notice some of the changes, some of the big changes that we've got in Premiere Pro CC. And it's all to do with redesigning the timeline. They redesigned the project window in CS6, CC has been redesigned the timeline. So you've got the same general idea for a timeline, one clip goes after another, you've got video tracks, you've got audio tracks. You might notice though, no little triangles to open up the video or the audio track. So I want to see a waveform here, which represents the sound of this clip. I can't click on a triangle, what I do is I grab hold of the track and just make it bigger. And so immediately you can see the left and right audio. You can also make the track bigger just by sticking your mouse over it, and then using the mouse wheel, just moves the mouse wheel up and down, and that makes your tracks bigger or smaller. Plus you've got a little spanner up here which has got a whole bunch of options, and if I click on that you can see there's all sorts of things, but one of them is expand all tracks. Click on that, it makes all the tracks bigger. Minimize all tracks, makes all the tracks smaller. I've been using Premiere since about 1995, so I've always had the little triangle to show the waveform off. And when I first started using it, it was, oh, God, that's really annoying. Actually, I'm so used to this now that it's lots more intuitive and nicer. Now, the second thing you might notice there about timeline is the look of the waveform. They've done a different kind of waveform display in Premiere Pro CC as compared to Premiere Pro. Now, if you want the old one, you can still get to it. You just come over to this little stack over here, click, and you untick this thing, rectified audio waveforms, and it goes back to your old-fashioned waveform. I quite like the rectified ones, as they call them, because the peaks and troughs grab me a bit more than they do in this mode. But you can use whichever one you like. You'll also notice there's little things like audio waveforms use the label color, so if I untick that, then you have different color representation for the sound. Here you can see you've also got stuff like whether you do heads and tails and continuous things, that sort of stuff. A nice thing they've added in is this, which is the ability to reveal a sequence in the project. So I've got a sequence here, I've got a project with like 300 bins, where the devil is the sequence? Well, bang, click, oh, finds the sequence in the project. The track header over here has been redesigned quite a lot. So you've got things like the sync locks, track locks and so on. This little eye here will turn on and turn off video tracks. So if you click on that, that turns the video track off, that turns it back on again. Down here you can see you've got a mute button, which will mute this track, or a solo button, which means you just hear this track and none of the others. So typical things we've found in a sound editing program, now made it in the way to Premiere. There's quite a lot of information you can put here in the track header, so I've just made it a little bit bigger. It has things like keyframes, whether you're showing the keyframes or not, and if you put in any keyframes jumping between them. But on top of that, there's more stuff you can add in. So if I right click on one of the tracks and say customize, you can see I've got all these different things that I can actually add into the track. So for example here, I've got this, which is an audio track meter, make more sense in a minute. I've got track volume, which I can dump in down there. I can take off some of the other stuff if I don't want it. And now you can see I've got a different track layout. So you can see here I've got the actual level of the track, and I've also got volume meters per track. Right, so do you want to come in and shape? Okay. You've got the same kind of customization on the video side. So things like the video, the sync locks and so on, you can pick these up and move them around. I can shove these down here if I want to. Let's move everything up a bit. Now once you've got a layout that you're happy with, just click on the spanner and say Save Preset and give it a name. And now you can see I've got my own layout there. I can come over here and I can choose that preset whenever I feel like it. This is the kind of thing which will be saved in that cloud user profile, so when you open up another Premiere you'll have the same settings there. Obviously you can save stuff, you can manage presets, you can assign keyboard shortcuts, you can delete them, all that sort of stuff. So I've got a new sequence here. I'm going to drop my first sequence inside of it and it nests it quite happily. But if I click this little button and then I drop my sequence inside of it, you notice it no longer nests it, it brings it in and splits it up into all the individual bits. Now I quite like nested sequences. Of course I can always just select them and then nest them again. But you have the option of when you're putting one sequence inside of another, it doesn't nest it, it comes in as a bunch of clips. You might also notice the absence of the work area bar above the timeline. Now actually this was a change they introduced in CS6. You don't have to use the work area bar. You can do everything just by using in points and out points. The difference with Premiere Pro CC is basically they've turned it off. You can still turn it back on if you really like the work area bar. Just come up to the little stack and say work area bar and you get it back. It's turned off as a default. Another nice little thing on sequences, which is particularly useful if you've got several sequences, is imagine you have got lots of sequences and they're all running off screen and you wish you hadn't opened so many and you want to close them all down and just keep this one. In Premiere Pro 6 you'd have to go and do it one at a time. In Premiere Pro CC you just right click on your sequence and say close all other timeline panels. That for me is amazingly useful. I have to admit that was one of the most irritating little things I'd found about Premiere, was the fact that if I had lots of sequences open it took me ages to close them. Now right click, close the rest of them. Now another thing they've added in is an audio clip mixer. I've got the same audio track mixer that we've had in Premiere for ages, but now I've got a separate one for clips. With this mixer, if you ever used it to add in keyframes or do a bit of audio automation, so you're adjusting the volumes as you're playing, it puts in keyframes and changes on the track level. That meant if you ever moved a clip, the changes wouldn't go with it. So now they've invented another one which lets you change stuff on the clip level. Now I want to change the audio level of this clip. I used to come in and hold down the right buttons and put in points and so on. I can now do the entire thing with the audio clip mixer. So just stick the cursor where I want to put in a point, turn on right keyframes and make a change. Move along a bit more, and so on. Doesn't stop you doing these kind of rubber bands in exactly the same way that we've been doing them for ages, but now you can do them through the clip mixer if you want to. Obviously you can get much nicer refinements on there. If you look at the effects control window, you can see it's just putting keyframes on the volume, just like it would have done before. It's just a nice way of controlling the clip. If I set the thing playing, and then make some adjustments,
wonderful.
It writes all those keyframes in. But the difference between this and what we had before is I can pick this clip up and move it, and the keyframes go with it, which it didn't on the track keyframes. If you want to use track keyframes, they're all still there. This mixer does exactly the same as it did before. You can still put an effect on an entire track, but you've now got a clip mixer for doing individual clips. Another new thing that we get inside of Premiere is the ability to do stuff with what's called through edits. Now imagine I've got a clip on the timeline here and I cut it up. I haven't actually taken anything out, I've just sliced that clip in two. That's what's called a through edit. In other words, there's an edit that does effectively nothing. We've got the ability to show through edits. So you can see there I've now got a little white marker showing me those two different edits joining together. But I've also, if I go and right click on it, I've got the ability to join them back again. At this point I've only just chopped it, I could undo it. But now, way down the road, I've also still got the ability to join these edits back together and make that back into one clip. Here I've got a situation where I've got two clips that are out of sync. Now it knows they're out of sync because the two clips are actually linked together. If I click on one, it automatically selects the other. And obviously you can come down to these numbers and right click and either move it or slip it into sync. Now that stuff's the same as before. The new thing that you have inside of this latest version of Premiere is in the preferences, you've got an option here to display out of sync indicators for clips that aren't linked. So that's ticked at the moment. Now if I then come to these things and unlink them, then you'll notice it's still showing me that things are out of sync and I can still put them back into sync. If I turn off that preference, then we're back to how it was in previous versions of Premiere. If the clips were unlinked, you couldn't tell for toffee. Other nice little changes on the timeline is the way that you see effects. There's a little icon there which says FX. Now at the moment, there's no effects on any of these clips. If I was to go into the list of effects and just get something simple, throw that onto the clip, you'll notice the effects icon changes, and if I right click on that little FX word, I can get to the parameters of whatever the effect is. You could do this in the previous one. What's happened is just the way that it's displayed is different. It's taking up less space. It's not giving me an irritating line which I accidentally grab and makes things semi-transparent. It's just a nice way of showing you there's an effect. I'll still probably come up to the effects control window and then adjust it up there if I want to. Of course, I do have the option of showing keyframe levels and opacity handles here. Again, click on the spanner, show video keyframes. I get the line where I can show the keyframes of whatever it is I've selected up here. Another nice thing that they've added in is the ability to relink clips on the timeline. Now here I've got a situation where I've lost some clips. They've been moved or renamed or something. So normally I'd have to go find them in the bin, right click and then say relink or link media. Now I can come down to the timeline and just right click directly on the clip and choose link media, find the clip wherever it is and then link up to it. Now you might also, if you've been used to Premiere before, notice that this has changed. The way I'm actually linking clips has changed. So for a start, I'm getting a dialog box which is showing me the thing I'm trying to link up. It's telling me where it used to be and other useful information about it. I've got some options down here about how it's going to match up the clips if it finds something. And I've also got this thing here, use media browser to locate files. Now if I don't have that ticked, it brings up the usual file dialog box. But if I do have that ticked, it launches into media browser. So it's a different way of finding clips. And this has got the great ability to search for them. So I know roughly where this thing is supposed to be. I'll just say click on the AVCHD folder and say search, and off it'll go and find the clip. There we are, found the right one. Got this nice little box here to just only show exact name matches. So it just trims down whatever the list is to just show me the clips that match the name, although I can click on that and show all of them. But the major thing is it will search for stuff. You just put it somewhere and it searches for clips and finds matches. Then you just click on it and say OK, and it relinks up the clips. It's relinked clip 43 because that's the one that I chose. Let's select these two clips, which are two other different clips. Choose link media. Now I've got those two. It says it knows where they were. Well, let's locate, search. Oh, found it. OK. Bang. Relinks them. The whole relinking of clips has got considerably better with Premiere Pro CC. Not only does it know where they used to be, it's much better at finding them, it's much cleverer at once you've found one it'll then link up other ones which are nearby. So it's got a huge amount of improvement. That one is actually really worth having. Because if you've ever moved stuff around and then you've had to relink clips on a very large project, you know what a pain in the neck it is. Well, it's a lot easier to do with Premiere Pro CC. Another thing you might notice compared to old versions of Premiere is we've got a bunch of buttons up here. So there's this new one for how you nest sequences. There's a snap icon. There's the tool, which lets you get to different presets and so on. And there's the add marker button. But what isn't there is the add encore chapter marker button. I can still do it. I can just click on this and it puts in markers. Double click on it and it brings up the marker dialog box, and I can still tick chapter marker and then put in a name. So now I've got an encore chapter marker. It's just there isn't an add encore chapter marker button. Actually, the easiest way to add an encore chapter marker is to set a keyboard shortcut for it. So if I go into edit and then keyboard shortcuts and search for chapter, and it says add chapter marker. It used to be saying add encore chapter marker in CS6. We're going to add a chapter marker. I'm just going to assign the M button to it. stops it doing what it used to do, but I've now assigned M to it. And now I can go through, click on M, and it goes straight to this, and put some words in there, and it's already marked as a chapter marker. So still easy to do, you just got to remember to set a keyboard shortcut for it. But there isn't an Add Encore chapter marker up here. That does lead on to another change with Premiere Pro CC and Encore. There is not an Encore CC. The net upshot of that is that you can no longer select a timeline and go File and then Dynamic Link and then Send to Encore. You'll notice it's actually greyed out on this system. I can't dynamic link a Premiere Pro CC timeline with Encore CS6. You only get dynamic link if you get CS6 Premiere and CS6 Encore, so it's gone. Everything that we're hearing about Encore is that they're not going to develop it anymore. They think it's gone far enough. They're going to carry on supplying Encore CS6, but there won't be a Encore CC or anything later. Get a file off to Encore, you've got to go File, Export, Media, and then choose some format from here. The format you use is kind of depend on all sorts of things. Obviously, if you're going off to Blu-ray, then it's probably an H.264 Blu-ray. If you're going off to DVD, then it's an MPEG-2 DVD, and then you choose a preset, and then you come down here and customize bit rates and so on, and you also change how you're doing the sound. Nothing's really changed about these settings. They have actually souped up the encoder a bit, so it's a bit better, but mainly it's the same as it was before. On the sound, for example, you can do Dolby Digital Stereo, but if you want to do surround sound, you've got to use the Code plugin, and if you use the Code plugin, you've actually got to pay extra to get the ability to make surround sound for a DVD. One little change that you do have in this export dialog box is down here. Import into project. Something that Premiere used to do up until around about CS4. When you exported something, it would come back in the project. They've added a little tick box, so now you can do the same thing with Premiere CC if you want to. Don't tick it, doesn't load it back into the project. Tick it, and it'll load it into the project after it's finished. And there are other small changes to do with timelines. The silly little things like this button here will select all the clips on a track. Now with CS6, if you clicked on that, it would select everything on one track. If you held down on the Shift key, it would select everything on every track. They've changed it, so if you now select that tool and click, it selects everything on every track from that point onwards. If you hold down on Shift, it's only the stuff on the particular track that you're clicking on. That's in response to user requests. Basically, people said, I'm forever trying to select everything on every track, why doesn't that do that as a default? Well, now they've changed it. The other thing that's changed is what happens when you put in a cross dissolve. So I want to put in a cross dissolve there. I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcut, Control D, and in goes my cross dissolve. So far, so exactly the same as before. However, you'll notice that if I actually say select a clip and have the cursor down there, and I do Control D, cross dissolve's actually gone up here on this clip. It's gone at the end of the clip. If I actually put that clip on its own and select it, Control D will put a cross dissolve on both ends of the clip. That's going to be great for titles because you'll automatically get a fade on it. You know, just make up a new title. Take the title, shove it onto the timeline, drag it out as long as you want, select it, Control D, instant cross dissolve at the start and the end. Nice and fast. It's going to be slightly more irritating if you're actually used to, you stick your cursor there at the join, you're trying to do a cross dissolve, and it's not working. Why is it not working? Because they're now prioritizing clip selection over track selection. So you think, okay, well, in that case, I'm going to need to select two clips and then use the keyboard shortcut to put the cross dissolve on. That would make sense. Control D to do the cross dissolve. Yeah, I've now got a cross dissolve between those two. But hang on, I've also got a cross dissolve at the start of this one. This one's the very start of the timeline. Let's put a cross dissolve on. Undo that. So how do I get a cross dissolve on that join? By using the keyboard shortcut. The best way is basically click on the exact join, then Control D. If you click on the join, you get the cross dissolve there. If you select some clips, you get cross dissolves wherever it can stick them. So start of that one, in between those two. Can't do that because it would go onto the other one. If you don't have anything selected, then it's based on the track, as before. It's taken me a bit of time to get used to that, and I've sometimes had cross dissolves popping up in different places. But I can see the logic. As soon as I get the hang of it, then I'll be able to actually whack cross dissolves on particularly things like titles quite a lot faster. Here's another nice change which is actually quite useful. I'm going to start trimming off this clip. I'm going to go into ripple mode, so I'm going to get rid of the clip, and I'm trimming and making it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and whap, let go. I trimmed the entire clip out. Go right down there. There is no extra frame in there. If I was doing that in the old versions of Premiere, you'd always leave one frame behind of whatever you were trimming off. Now I can trim out every single bit of the clip if I want to. Other nice little things. Let's just shove a clip up in the source window here. They redesigned the source and the program windows in CS6, so you can customize all this, you can add things on, customize the buttons. All that's exactly the same as before. What's nice is that I can just click on this little button here and it will show me the audio waveform. Go click on that, it goes back to the picture. It was a thing you can get to from the spanner, and you can say audio waveform. Now you can click and see the waveform separately. This was actually in CS6 and some of the earlier versions. If I want to take this clip and put it onto the timeline, normally the sound and video would come in together. If I was just to grab that icon and drop it, you'll notice that's just brought in the video. Grab that icon and drop it, it's just brought in the sound. Those two draggy things we could do before. This one to click in between showing the waveform or not, we couldn't do before. Small one to mention, while I've got a timeline open with the audio showing there. Let's just solo that track and play it. And you'll notice the sound's all over one side and not over the other. This was a small thing introduced in CS6, but you may not be aware of. If you right click on the audio and go to audio channels, I've got two channels here, left and right. It's saying on both of those play the left and the right. Well, I can use this dialog box to say, yes, stick the left out on both of them. That sorts out my audio and puts the same out on both tracks. I can also select lots of clips and do that with all of them at once. Now I'm just going to add some effects to me there. Let's just take a three-way color corrector and put that on and make a slight change on that. Let's just shove me up in the corner. And we'll add on another thing. This is a lighting effect. So I've got several effects on that clip. Some of them souped up by the Mercury playback engine, so they'll play in real time, like the color correction and the motion path. Some of them, like this spotlight, not. I'd like to apply that to a whole bunch of other clips. Now what I can do is to select all those effects and then make a preset out of them, which I can then apply to other clips, but I don't want to do that. I'm just going to use the paste attributes dialog. It's been in Premiere ever since I started. Right click, copy the clip, select the clips you want to copy the effects onto, right click, paste attributes. But in all previous versions of Premiere it would paste everything. You wouldn't have an option. In this one, up it pops, and you can see here, you can say, well, I don't want to paste the lighting effect. I don't want to put on the channel volume stuff. Yep, do want the motion, don't want the opacity. Click. Now all these other clips have got the same color correction and motion path on them, but they don't have the spotlight. Again, just a nice little change. Use paste attributes a lot. It's nice to be able to select the bits you actually want to paste. Other nice little changes. I said they didn't do much to the bin. One thing they have done is that if you're in icon mode here, you can now come down to this little icon here and choose how to sort the icons. So you can stick it in the same order as the list view, or you can say, well, let's do it by, I don't know, video usage, or by comment, or by media type, or whatever. Just a nice thing. You can rearrange these nicely inside the bin, which didn't work as well before. Another nice new thing is the safe areas. If I just click on the button to bring up the safe areas, you can see I've now got some extra lines in here warning me of the safe areas when I'm doing a 4:3 image from a 16:9 timeline. We've got some new effects. So let's just pop into here, and I'm going to type in clip, and it brings up the clip name effect, which basically puts the name of the clip up on screen. It's a bit like the timecode effect, which put timecode on there. This puts the name of it, which you can shove wherever you feel like, change the size of it, all that sort of thing. Rename the clip, and you'll notice there it renames it to whatever the name of the clip is there. You've even got the option to ignore what it's called on the timeline and call it whatever the master clip was. These are the sort of things you use mainly to send off an edit to somebody with some hints on screen about which clips should go where, just in case all the other EDLs and AAFs and everything else fail. The other new effects that we've got are called Lumetri looks. In CS6, if you bought the production premium, you would get a program called SpeedGrade, which is Adobe's grading program. SpeedGrade has been quite considerably improved with the new version, which I'm not going to talk about here. What you do have though is the ability to use some of the SpeedGrade looks inside of Premiere. So down here you can see Lumetri looks. Lumetri is the engine that runs SpeedGrade. So they've now put that into Premiere, which means if you create a look in SpeedGrade, you can bring it into Premiere, or you can use some looks they've already got. So there are cinematic looks, typical bleach bypass effects. You notice you've got a little thumbnail there showing them off. Grab hold of any of them, drag them onto the clip, and you can see it's changed the look of the clip. So it's a bit like good old-fashioned Magic Bullet movie looks. You can choose any of these and just grab it and drag it on to the clip and click the play button and it'll play it for you. Now you'll notice that I've ended up there with 2 Lumetri looks added into that particular clip, because that's what I told you to do. These are the presets. You can click on this little tick box here and then you can go off and find some look that you've created yourself. Now I haven't got any looks that I created myself, so I'm not going to do that, but it does mean if you get to learn SpeedGrade, instead of having to render the footage out of SpeedGrade, you can save the look and then just load it into Premiere, and lo and behold, Premiere will have that color correction added to it. To get into SpeedGrade, you've still got Send to SpeedGrade. It was introduced in CS6. We're hoping that more stuff will be added in, but right now this is the first major step. It's the ability to have a look that's been created in SpeedGrade and then throw it onto a clip. The other new effects we've got are on the audio side. So open up audio, and you've got the same kind of range of effects that we've had before, but we do have some new ones. Anything that says Legacy is the old Premiere one. If there's another thing, like the compressor, this is a new compressor as compared to the old one. So dump it onto a clip, open it up, and you'll see a compressor which, if you're used to Audition, is exactly the one that we can use in Audition. Basically, there are a couple of nice audio effects inside of Audition which now work directly in Premiere. Now obviously if you're subscribing to the whole CC suite, you'll have Audition as well anyway, and Audition is still better for sound stuff, but one of the things that's happened to Audition with the CC versions is Audition is now 64-bit, whereas in Premiere Pro CS6 it was only 32-bit. It means a lot of nice things for Audition, it can access more memory and so on, but it also means you can now share more stuff between Premiere and Audition because they're both 64-bit, so Premiere has nicked some of Audition's effects. If I were to come into the preferences, you can also see under audio, there's a new audio plugin manager where you can get it to scan for any extra VST plugins that you've got, or you can deliberately add some in yourself. And of course you can apply these effects on a track level. So I'm just going to pop in here. If you ever use this in CS6, you know that the list went off the screen, so they've tidied it up a bit and put them in sensible sections, and I can strap a multi-bar compressor on there, right click, edit, change some settings, and I tend to use this when I'm doing tutorials to kind of try and even out the volume between various clips. I put a compressor on the entire track and it sort of smooths out the volume levels. Now in Premiere, effects are performed by using the Mercury playback engine. This is where it uses the graphics card to do a lot of the work to actually play back effects. It doesn't actually play back the clip, it just plays back whatever effects you've got on there. So all these things have got effects and play it back, and you'll notice it's actually playing it back quite happily. There's even this little green dot here on the interface telling me it's not dropping any frames. Of course I can click a button and put it up into a full screen playback. As you can see, it playing back nicely there at full quality. And that's all being done by my graphics card. Now I happen to have an NVIDIA graphics card in this computer. I'm running Windows 8, no particular reason, I just fancy doing this tutorial using Windows 8. There's no major advantages to Windows 8 over Windows 7 when it comes to using Premiere Pro. Some of the gizmos we have, like the Matrox MX02s, haven't got proper drivers for Windows 8, even though they do work. But anyway, you can see I'm running here on Windows 8 and I'm using an NVIDIA graphics card, which is a thing called a 660 Ti. Now Adobe validates certain graphics cards. They do this, so they say these are the ones we've tested, these are the ones we'd recommend you buy because we know they work. On the other hand, it works with lots of other cards. They only can validate a few because it takes a lot of effort. The ones they've validated are generally £300, £400 to £1,000, but it does work quite happily on simpler graphics cards, the kind of cards that we have in our laptops and so on. Now with CS5 and CS6, to actually make it work on a graphics card that wasn't officially validated, you had to dig out a text file. With Premiere Pro CC, all you've got to do is go to the project settings, find the renderer, click on GPU, and if you've got a not validated graphics card, it just pops up with a message saying, this isn't validated, do you want to use it anyway? You say yes. Nice and simple. It also now works with ATI graphics cards as well as NVIDIA. Now I have an ATI one, it would say GPU acceleration OpenCL, and you'd select that, and you get real-time performance with an ATI graphics cards. Now we tend to stick with NVIDIA because nearly everybody else supports those. So if you want to use grading in DaVinci, it likes NVIDIA cards, not ATIs and so on. So we tend to stick with them, but the nice thing is now if you have got an ATI graphics card, you can use it to accelerate Premiere. You might have noticed there one little thing, the project settings have moved. They're down here. The project manager, which is a way of taking your edit and trying to concertina it down to just the stuff you've been using, again that's moved down here. That hasn't had an overhaul, they just moved it. Why have they moved a few things around? Because they reckon these are more sensible places to put these rather than off on one of these other headings around here. A lot of people didn't even know where the project settings were. Well, the obvious place on the file menu, you get your project settings. Just looking around these menus here, you can see on the sequence one, I've got a new one, go to gap, which will find me a gap in the sequence. You've also got a setting down here where you can look for duplicate frame markers. If that's ticked, it'll show you duplicate frames that are used in the sequence. Again, lots of nice little things they've added in. Very useful little things, not staggeringly headline grabbing or revolutionary, but they're things that will help you out and make your editing better. And that's what they've concentrated on, trying to make things as nice to use as possible and adding in things to make it nicer. One thing that has had an overhaul in this version of Premiere is track patching. So I'm going to make up a new timeline and I'm going to go and just select a clip, put it up in the source and have a look at it, and I want to take a bit of that and I want to put it onto the timeline. Now if I just drag and drop, it works the same as it did before. If you're using a button, and the buttons can also be assigned to keyboard shortcuts, if you're using any of these, then how does it know where the video is supposed to go? I've got an audio track and a video track. Where the devil is it supposed to go on this interface? It's all down to these little icons at the front. And the big change that we've had with Premiere Pro CC as opposed to previous versions is that it used to be a combination of these icons and which tracks are selected. Those two are now completely divorced. It's really entirely down to where these icons are. So if I put the V up there and the A down there and I click on a button, it puts the clip with the video up there and the audio down there. If I was to move the V up to V3 and the audio down to A3, that's where the clip goes. You notice some of these are selected, some of these aren't, because the selection here is now completely ignored. Whichever track is selected is nothing to do with the track patching. They're just basically trying to make the track patching side of things a bit easier and a bit quicker to understand. Of course, you have got ways of moving all the sources up and moving them down. You can also set some presets up, so you can say, right, I'm going to have a preset where the video goes up there and the audio goes down there. This clip is actually seen as a stereo clip, but if I said let's change it to a mono clip, I end up with two audio tracks going in different places. So I could have a preset where the video goes there, the audio from audio 2 there, the audio from audio 1 goes there. Basically right click, save that as a preset and go back to the defaults, or I can go to my preset. Things like sync locks, they're still here and they're still important, but they've basically divorced it from the track selection. They've added in new options for editing to tape. Now I don't have any decks attached, but you can see I've got a couple of new options here. If I pop up with the window, you can see there's a lot more stuff to do with recording down to tape, which wasn't there in the first place. There's one really quite large change, and that's to do with a render codec. This may be the sort of thing that you say, wow, that's incredibly useful, or for some people may not be that important at all. But the major thing is that they have included the ability to use the AVID codec properly inside of Premiere. So you see this new heading that says DNxHD. That means that you are going to be setting up a project preset, and you're going to be rendering the file into AVID's own format, which is DNX. The whole point about this is when you do an effect and you can't play it back in real time, you have to render it. If it's going to render it in some kind of compressed format, what will happen is you'll render it, it'll be rendered into a compressed format, you'll then go through and you'll export it and it'll get rendered again, and every time you re-render, every time you're going from one compressed format to another, you might end up with more noise and artifacts being added in. Well, the point about AVID DNX is it's a very simple codec. It's a bit like high definition DV in that it does every frame as a whole frame. Takes up a reasonable amount of space, but it's a really nice standard codec. You'll find if you buy something like a Blackmagic HyperDeck shuttle or a Blackmagic camera, you can record into AVID DNX format in that if you want to. But with Apple doing all their changes to do with Final Cut Pro these days, you have to wonder how long they'll be supporting Apple ProRes. DNX could well take over as the intermediate codec of choice for everybody, and Adobe have now brought it into Premiere, and it can now be assigned as a codec that you can use for rendering. So you can make files out of it. When you go to export a movie, then there's DNX codec versions which you can use in there. They also do smart rendering. So you can see you've got smart rendering here. If you actually have some AVID DNX stuff on the timeline in the first place and you've got your renders in DNX, then when you render it out into this kind of file, it doesn't remake any of the stuff, it just sticks it all together. You get the same kind of smart rendering with some other codecs as well these days, like XD Cam, so there's a lot of work that's gone on in there. But the fact that it's got DNX in there, the fact that it understands AVID files, it actually understands AVID MXF files. In fact, you can even load up clips which you'll find in an AVID media folder, and a lot of those different clips will actually load directly up into Premiere. The other quite major changes that we have in this version of Premiere are to do with multi-camera. So I haven't actually got some multi-camera clips here, but I'm just going to take a bunch of clips in the bin, right click on them and say create a multi-camera source sequence. Now there's various ways of actually doing a multi-camera sequence. One is to drop them onto the timeline and then line them up, or two is select them in the bin and then get Premiere to line them up for you. Now if you're getting Premiere to line it up, it's going to be, is it going to do it on in points or out points or timecode? These are the things that were in Premiere Pro CS6. The new one that you have in this version of Premiere is this one. You can get it to line stuff up based on the audio. So I am basically going to say line it up on the audio, move the clips into its own little bin after they've been processed, make up a new sequence based on one of the clips, and just go for it. And it goes through, it analyzes all the clips and then does its best to line them all up. Obviously it depends on how good the audio is. One camera right at the back of the room might not be picking up the audio as well as the others, but it's a nice thing they've added into it which will probably make your multi-camera work a lot easier. When it comes to editing the multi-camera, so I've set it all up and I'm ready to go, then Premiere does not create a new window, instead it just takes over the two existing windows that you've got. Other things that have changed. The way that Premiere deals with hardware changed greatly inside of CS6, so that instead of having different settings per sequence, you just go to playback and then choose whatever you want to output your video through. This hasn't changed tremendously. The way that CS6 works is actually quite a lot better than the way CS5 works. You're going to need new drivers for whatever hardware you're using with Premiere, your Blackmagics or Matrox or whatever, but then that's normal. And obviously we'll expect to have those pretty soon after it comes out. One change that we have got is that you can actually enable or disable the transmit, the output through whatever your device is, from the program monitor here. So that's just disabled it, that's re-enabled it, or by coming into your preferences. There's been another nice little change with the media browser. I'm going to get out of this project, I'm going to make up a new one, call it something, and I want to bring in some of the clips that I was using in that project into this one. In previous versions of Premiere, I would go File and then Import and then point it to the Premiere Pro project. But now you can use the media browser. So here is that project. Double click on it, and then inside of the media browser up pops everything that was in that project, all the different sequences and the bins and so on. And I can just grab hold of that bin and bring it straight into this project. Grab hold of that sequence and bring it in as well. Nice little change. You can now see the contents of whatever project you're trying to bring in the media browser, not just by file and import. If you have ever brought in a clip and it's come in as a stereo clip and you say, oh, I wish it was mono or whatever, you have been able to select the clip in the bin, right click, go up to modify, audio channels, and then say, right, well, let's use what's in the file. Let's say it's mono or stereo or whatever. Then when you throw it onto the timeline, you have 2 separate mono tracks as opposed to one stereo one. Now that hasn't changed. But what you can do is that after putting a clip on the timeline, you can now go back to the clip into the bin and you can change the audio channel. So the next time I use this, that's going to be seen as a stereo clip. So it pops up with this message. I could read it all out, but essentially what it's saying is you're changing the audio channels on this. It's not going to change ones on the timeline, it'll only change it the next time you bring it in. Again, a small little change, but actually very useful, because in previous versions, if I ever wanted to change that, I ended up importing 2 different versions of the clips and faffing, and it was a real pain in the posterior. This is a lot nicer. And the final thing probably to mention is just a little bit more about the cloud. Now I mentioned when you make up a new project you had the option there of syncing up settings. You can do it from inside the program. So you can see here, I can go down to File and then choose my user account, and it says sync settings now, in which case I click on that. It asks me what account I want to sync it with, and obviously you put your password in, and then it goes off and it syncs the settings with the cloud. So this is very useful if you use 3 or 4 machines, because you can just say, right, I want you either to take my settings I've got here and upload them, I want to download them, so this machine is then synced up with the way all my other machines are set. You've got to restart the project, and then it reopens up Premiere, and now any changes, any preferences that are in my cloud settings are now on this machine. For example, I always set up a keyboard shortcut so that if I press the P button, it gets me to the playback settings, because I'm forever turning things on and off with my Blackmagic or Matrox devices. You have a sync option there. You also have a sync setting button down the bottom there. And of course you can get to other settings for your Creative Cloud account there as well. With a perpetual license, and you can still buy a perpetual license of CS6 if you want to. You can't get this version on a perpetual license. That's where you pay for it once and never have to pay again. You can only get this version if you want to go onto the subscription and pay Adobe a certain amount every month. But with a permanent license, you got a serial number, you stuck it in, it activated, and that was it. On a cloud version, like this one, the computer has to go on the internet every so often to verify the license. It's just part of what it does. You have to go on the internet to verify the license. After about a month, you've got to put it on the internet, but you've got about 30 days to do it between when it's due and when it actually times out. So you've got plenty of time to make sure you just pop it on the net and get it activated. Now with a serial number and a permanent license, you are allowed to install the program on 2 different computers and get it activated on 2 different computers. You're not allowed to use them both at the same time. The idea is you have one on a desktop and one on a laptop, but you are allowed 2 activations. If you wanted to deactivate it off one machine and then reactivate it on a 3rd machine, you could do that. Well, it's the same with the cloud and your Adobe ID. At the moment here, I am signed in as David, but if I come up to help and sign out, that's logging this computer off. It's deactivating Premiere. I am now signed out. Although I can still carry on use it for the moment, if I then shut it down and go back into it, it's going to say, you really need to sign in. Now if my machine is not on the internet, I do get the option of signing in later. And it will let you use the software for a certain amount of time. I think at the moment they're adjusting the amount of time. I think it's currently 30 days. They're going to make it a bit longer. But they'll let you use it for a certain amount of time before you have to sign in again. But you will have to sign in at some point. Now you've got your 2 sign-ins. Imagine you have signed in on 2 different computers and they've both gone horribly wrong, and you need to sign in on a 3rd one. You need to set it up again. When you go to sign in, it might say, hang on, this is activated on 2 other machines. You have the option at that point to say, well, kick both of those out and activate this one, please. The whole signing in process has made it easier to get around problems caused by hard drives going wrong. Now you're not allowed to do that too often. You are allowed to sign in and sign out as many times as you like. You're not allowed to automatically deactivate other computers that often. But generally the process of using it, as long as you're happy to connect your machine to the internet, generally the process of using the cloud is actually pretty easy. You do get other benefits of being part of the Creative Cloud, but you don't have to use them. Some people have believed that actually you're editing entirely on the internet. No, you're not. You're basically having a machine, which everything's on your machine, and it has to go on the internet occasionally just to authorize it, but apart from that you don't have to go on the internet at all. You don't have to put anything on the cloud. They give you a bit of space. You don't have to use that. You don't have to sync up your settings. So it's like a perpetual license, with the one exception that you really do have to connect your machine to the internet at some point. Now for some people that's not an option. They're going to come up with ways of dealing with that. But if you're interested in that, just talk to us about that and we can tell you what the current situation is. So there we are, that summed up some of the nice new features that you got in Premiere Pro CC. Like I said, you can only get that if you get the Creative Cloud. You can't get this on a permanent license anymore. CS6 is still available with a permanent license, which you can buy from us at DVC. If you want the Creative Cloud, you have two options. You have the Creative Cloud for individuals, which you can only get direct from Adobe. You can't buy from us. And then you have the Creative Cloud for Teams, which is a version which has been invented for businesses. Now the major advantage of Creative Cloud for Teams for businesses is that the business gets control over the licenses. They're not tied to a particular Adobe ID. You can say who can use them and who can't. You also get more web space and you get a bit better Adobe support, but the major thing is the control of the licenses. Now if you want to know about Creative Clouds for Teams, we can happily sell that and we can explain more in depth. Just give us a ring or send us an email or pop down to the office for a chat and we can sign you up to Creative Cloud for Teams. There's lots of nice advantages to do with that. If you just want the individual ones, which is a bit cheaper, then you can only get that direct from Adobe. But you'll still need a nice computer to put it on, and of course that's what we have been doing ever since we started in 1995, is making really nice computers that work very well with your software. And of course we've been supplying Adobe Premiere since we started in 1995, so we know it really well. So even if you're getting your Creative Cloud software from Adobe, come to us at DVC, we can make a system for you, we'll install your Creative Cloud software on it, activate it, test it and support it. As long as you're getting the system from us, we'll still support you if you get the Creative Cloud software. Please give us a ring or an email if you want to know some more. So there's a lot of changes inside of Premiere. They're all small ones. They haven't added stereoscopic editing, for example. They just souped up the way it's working. Now I'm making up this video at the end of May 2013. The Premiere CC versions are supposed to be coming out on the 17th of June, so we're a couple of weeks away and we've just been given an advanced version so I could make this video to show off to you. Probably in a month or two's time it'll be outdated, because one of the things that happens with the Creative Cloud is that you don't just bring out a version and then wait for another year and bring out another version. They'll bring out changes to the program as they need to. So who knows, a couple of months down the road we might have some more features added in. It'll change and evolve as you use it. You won't have to wait every year for some new feature to come along that makes your workflow better.